Right, good morning everyone. Happy New Year to you. It's really my hope and it's my prayer that 2023 will be a special year for all of us, that we will be so under the impression of God's closeness and His care and His provision this year that it will just take our faith, our hope and our love to a whole new level. So, let me start with a question this new year. Okay, so I'm still full of questions. It's new year, but I still have a lot of questions. So here's my question for you. What is your favorite time of the year? So if you just think of a specific time in the year, like it can be a period or a specific period, or it can be a month or a season or anything else, what would you say? Just shout it out. What's your favorite time of the year? Spring. Autumn? Summer? Christmas. I'll wait for Christmas. Any specific month? December. Okay, we've got December there. Right. Now, so for me, it is usually the new year, the start of a new year. And it's got nothing to do with the weather. You wouldn't believe it, but it's got nothing to do with the weather. And the reason that I'm just such a big fan of the beginning of a new year is it's because it's usually a time that people tend to spend some time reflecting on their lives, setting new goals for themselves. And we all know it's nothing more than a date on a calendar, but it feels as though it's an opportunity to start fresh. To wipe the slate clean and to just start over. When you go from the 31st day of the 12th month to the 1st of the 1st, it just feels new. It just feels fresh. When you write, you change one digit at the end of the year, and something feels different. It just feels new. Like you want to say of any issue that you may have been struggling with. Well, you know what? That was last year. This is a new year. So let's start fresh. Let's just try again. Let's start with that weight loss program. Let's start with that exercise program. Let's join a gym. Let's put a regular date in the diary so that we can talk on a regular basis. Let's forgive. Let's go to church every opportunity we get. I just love the energy and the positivity and the hope that seems to be all around us at the beginning of a new year. And therefore, usually, this is by far my favorite time of the year. Usually. But not this year. Not this year. This year, I've been thinking along different lines. So my thinking is slightly different. It's what if thinking. So I've been thinking, what if your circumstances are so difficult that you do not see a future? And it feels to you as though you've lost all hope. What if the storm you're in is so destructive, so negative, that trying to be positive feels like it's the stupidest thing and the most stupid and silliest response that you can have within your circumstances? What if you feel as though life itself has lost its meaning? How on earth do you stand up and face the day with energy then? I mean, how can you set new goals for yourself if you don't know how you're still going to be around to achieve those goals? What if you've lost hope to such an extent that you are just drifting, that you are just existing from day to day? In short, what do you do at the start of a new year when all you can think about is the fact that you need a miracle? Exactly that. You think about and you pray for the miracle that you so desperately need. Because everyone needs a miracle sometimes. In fact, if you're not in need of a miracle right now, you either needed one a while ago or you are going to need one soon enough. Trust me on that one. You're going to need one. But all of us will go through times when you just realize that nothing short of an act of God can make the difference that you require in your life. And maybe that is exactly where some of you are right now. You're in the beginning of 2023. And so if this is you, or if you think you may need a miracle somewhere in the future, then this message is for you. So let's start the new year by focusing on a well-known miracle in the Bible. And we're just going to draw some lessons from it. In fact, I drew 12 lessons from this specific miracle. And we're just going to go through it little by little. I'm going to read it bit by bit, and we're just going to look at the lessons. Is that okay? So let's follow that together. Okay, we'll start with Matthew 15. Matthew 15, verse 29. Jesus left there and went along the Sea of Galilee. Then he went up a mountainside and sat down. You know, I just love the detail in this sentence. Jesus went up the mountainside and he sat down. It was like he was inviting them to come to him. As though he was saying, listen, guys, I'm going to be here for a while. For as long as you need me, I'm going to be here. So you just bring whatever you're struggling with, you bring that to me. And that is exactly what they did. Great crowds came to him, bringing the lame, the blind, the crippled, the mute, and many others, and laid them at his feet. And he healed them. You know, when I read this, I'm struck by all the different kinds of people who came to Jesus. They had all sorts of issues, but all of them had one thing in common. They were all desperate. They were in need of a miracle. In fact, every miracle story that you will ever read in the Bible had one thing in common. They all started with people who were absolutely desperate for help. Every single person who ever received a miracle from God were in a crisis. No exceptions. So friends, if you feel daunted here in the beginning of the year, because you are so overwhelmed by the crisis you may be facing, and you just don't know how on earth you're going to survive, I've got some good news for you this morning. You are a candidate for a miracle. You are a candidate for a miracle. But if everything is plain sailing for you, if life is just good, I'm really sorry, but you do not meet the criteria for a miracle right now. So the miracle is just going to pass you by, okay? This is not for you. However, those of you who feel you are in a storm, those of you who feel battered and bruised by your circumstances, those of you who feel as though you are drowning right now, you are a perfect candidate for a miracle. You meet a criteria. But do not stay in the valley that you are in. Go up the mountainside to where Jesus is. Take your problems to him and ask him for help, because he is the miracle worker. You've got to take it to him. Okay, let's continue. Verse 31. The people were amazed when they saw the mute speaking, the crippled made well, the lame walking, and the blind seeing. And they praised the God of Israel. So Jesus was sitting interacting with these people, and he truly saw what was going on in their lives. He saw the need of the people who came to him, and he did something about it because he cared so much. In fact, just listen to the next sentence. Jesus called his disciples to him and said, I have compassion for these people. They have already been with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. So these people have been with Jesus for 3 whole days. You know, and I get the impression that Jesus sat down on that mountainside and he decided that he wasn't going anywhere until he made time for everyone. He didn't leave before he spent time with each one of them and addressed their needs. Why? Because he had compassion for them. And the word that's used here for compassion describes a feeling in your gut. You know, it was like Jesus had a gut-wrenching love for these people. It stirred him deeply. He cared deeply for each one of them. You know, I think we are sometimes in such a hurry to just get to our own to-do lists that we sometimes miss the needs of the people around us. We don't always hear their cries. And if we do, we don't always make time for them. But not Jesus. He is never too busy for you. He's never too busy for you. And so know that no matter what you may be going through, no matter what the nature of the miracle is that you may need in your life, Jesus has time for you. And he's inviting you to come to him as you are, just as you are. And actually, for all of us who are Jesus followers, there's an implicit call here to make sure that we cultivate a similar compassion for those around us. That we will also look at the people in need around us and we should care deeply for them. And we should care so deeply that it turns our stomachs, that we feel it inside ourselves. Because here's the thing. Jesus then goes on and he says this. He says, I do not want to send them away hungry, or they may collapse on the way. I do not want to send them away hungry because they may collapse on the way. Jesus didn't only help them with the needs they brought to him. He saw what they needed extra, all the extra bits. He saw that they needed something more, and he wanted to provide that to them as well. And this actually reminds me of a similar time earlier in the same Gospel according to Matthew, when Jesus gave the famous Sermon on the Mount. And he also sat down on the mountainside and spoke to the people. And then he urged people not to worry about tomorrow. And he said this. He said in Matthew 6:33, but seek first the kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. Now these people who came to him, that's exactly what they've been doing. They've been seeking God's kingdom first. They've been with Jesus for 3 whole days, and it cost them. And so Jesus was going to provide for them what they needed. Friends, maybe it feels to you as though you are not even sure whether God has heard your cries of help. And if he's heard you, you're not sure if he's really going to help you, if he's going to do anything about it. Can I just assure you of this thing? God has heard you. And he is hearing you. He knows you better than you know yourself. He knows the tears that wet your pillow every night. He knows the moments of despair you are in at times. He sees your hunger, and he cares. He cares. I don't know how he's going to come through for you, whatever your situation may be. All I know is this. Jesus doesn't want to send you away hungry, because he doesn't want you to collapse on the way. Jesus doesn't want to send you away hungry because he doesn't want you to collapse on the way. He loves you more than you could ever know. And he's inviting you to come to him with your hunger, with your pain, with your loneliness, with your despair, with your hopelessness, with everything else that's bothering you, with your crisis, with your storm, whatever it may be. And he's asking you to seek his kingdom first and trust him for the rest. Saying, seek my kingdom first, and I will give you all the rest that you need. I will take care of you. Verse 33, his disciples answered, where could we get enough bread in this remote place to feed such a crowd? So they were in the middle of nowhere, meaning that even if they had loads of money, which they didn't, they would not be able to buy enough food for all the people. It seemed impossible to feed this immense crowd in front of them. Now, friends, often when we are also in seemingly impossible situations, the questions we ask are similar than what the disciples asked. We want to know, where are we going to get what we need? Or we ask, how on earth is this going to be possible? How do we get out of this situation? How is it going to work out for us? But that is never God's question. Nothing is impossible for him. So he never asks how he's going to do something. If he wants to do something, he just does it. He's God. In Jeremiah 32 verse 27, we're reminded of that. I am the Lord, the God of all mankind. Is anything too hard for me? The answer is no. And so, Jesus doesn't ask where they're going to get the food or how it's going to happen. Instead, he's got a different question. His question sounds different. He says, how many loaves do you have? Jesus asked. He asked the disciples what they already had. And maybe he's asking you the same question. You were waiting for a miracle from God. Maybe it's the same question for you. What do you already have? Do you maybe already have people in your life who could possibly help you in your situation? Or there may be already people who will support you in your situation. Do you have resources that may be helpful to you in the crisis you're facing? Do you have certain skills or maybe certain talents that God is asking to give back to him, to entrust to him, to commit to him? What do you already have that you need to just place in God's hands during this season you're in right now? It's a different question, but maybe that is the question we need to answer. And my hunch is, friends, that if you're in need of a miracle, you will probably think, well, not a lot. I don't have a lot. And that's exactly what the disciples thought. Listen to them. Jesus asked them what they had, and this is what they answered. They said, sorry, that was my previous lesson. There we go. They said, 7, they replied, and a few small fish. Now that's very little. In fact, the loaves they spoke about were more like rolls. So it wasn't massive. It was just like rolls. And so they basically had 7 rolls for 13 people, Jesus and his 12 disciples. And so they had, those of you quick at this, they had half a roll, who like to divide things between people. They had half a roll for each one of them. That was their lunch. That was what they had to provide for their own needs. To take care of them. When all the people had left, they thought, we have got lunch sorted. Don't worry about this, Jesus. We've got it sorted. We've got half a loaf for you. So you'll be fine. Like all of us. And there's an extra half for one of you. I don't know. Whoever's finished first will get that one. Anyway, however, what I find fascinating, friends, is that even though they barely had enough to take care of their own needs, Jesus asked them to bring what they had to help others. It wasn't that Jesus ignored their needs, that they were hungry too. He just asked them to trust him and to look past their own needs to the needs of those around them. He asked them to look past their own needs to the needs of others. Even in the midst of the fact that they were all in the middle of nowhere, and they probably felt that they couldn't afford to give away the little that they had. I mean, it's just half a roll they had. Now they had to give that away as well. Yet that is what Jesus asked. And that is exactly what they did. So let's read the rest of the story. Then Jesus speaks and he says, he told the crowd to sit down on the ground. Now, in the beginning of the story, Jesus sat down and he invited people to come to him with their problems. Now, he stood up and he invited them to sit down. It was like he was saying, now I am coming to you to address not only the things you asked for, I'm coming to address something that you didn't even ask for. It was like he was saying, you get out of the way, sit down. It's time for me to do what only I can do. Friends, I don't know what crisis you are facing, but maybe it is time for you to sit down and get out of Jesus' way. Maybe he's at a point of doing something incredible in your life, but you are so busy trying to fix it yourself and thinking that you can do it, that you just doesn't want to let go. And you don't want him to take control. Can I just say it again? Sit down and get out of Jesus' way. And be ready to receive what he wants to give to you. Open your heart. Open your hands. Open your eyes. Who knows? It may just satisfy the hunger you've got in your soul like nothing else ever will. And it may lead to the miracle that you so desperately need. Then he took the 7 loaves and the fish. And when he had given thanks, he broke them and he gave them to the disciples. And they in turn to the people. They all ate and were satisfied. The miracle happened in Jesus' hands. When the disciples were willing to place all the resources they had in Jesus' hands and let him do what only he can do, they witnessed the miracle. And when Jesus broke the bread, it was multiplied. And when Jesus touched broken lives, they were healed. So maybe it's time to trust Jesus with what's already broken in your life, and also trust him to break what still needs to be broken in your life. Meaning all the other things that you may have placed your trust in. All the loaves of bread. All the things you trust in rather than in him in your life. Because here's what I see, friends, when I look at the story. When Jesus does the breaking, things get better. When Jesus does the breaking, things get better. And so maybe you're in a season where it just feels to you as though Jesus is breaking the little bread, just the half a loaf you've got, you place it in his hands, and he's breaking it. The little bit you gave him. You thought you had something good. You thought you had something that was supposed to help you, that was supposed to sustain you. And suddenly, that is being torn apart. And it's painful. Because all the certainty is gone. Friends, if Jesus is doing the breaking, trust him. Because he will use it to do a miracle. The bread multiplies when Jesus is the one breaking. Romans 8:28. And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. Here's what you need to do. Here's what you need to know. Here's what you need to know. Jesus will not break you. Jesus will not break you. He may break the things that you have placed your trust in other than him, but he will not break you. In fact, if you feel broken, he's inviting you to come to him because he heals the broken-hearted. Psalm 34 verse 18. The Lord is close to the broken-hearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. That is what he does. So if you're broken, you are broken. Come to him and trust him. And if you've given yourself to him and it feels as though Jesus is breaking some stuff in your life that you relied on, continue to trust him because he is the one doing the miracle. Let's continue. Afterward, the disciples picked up 7 baskets full of broken pieces that were left over. The number of those who ate was 4,000 men, besides women and children. So they only had 7 loaves to start with, and after everyone had eaten, after everyone had enough, they had 7 baskets full left over. From 7 loaves to 7 baskets, after everyone had enough. Now what's interesting here is that the word that's used for basket in this particular miracle is not a small basket. It's a basket that is large. It's huge. In Acts, they used the same word when they said Paul was lowered down a wall in a basket. So this was adult-sized baskets. I mean, this was a big bucket, that they put people in. And, you could fit an adult in if you wanted to be in a basket. Anyway, it was just, this little that I have, basically what I communicated in this text is to say that it was plentiful. It was so much that thousands of people had food, and then these huge baskets were full to the brim with what was left over. Simply because they were willing to trust Jesus with what they had. And maybe that is what we need to do as well. If we want to see miracles in our lives, we need to place ourselves in Jesus' hands. And we need to trust him with our deepest needs and let him break whatever else we may put our trust in. And ask him to do that miracle that only he can do. Now friends, this is a familiar story, but maybe you feel as though it's slightly different than the one you remember. I mean, if I were to ask you how many loaves there were and how many fishes there were, you would probably say there were 5 loaves and 2 fishes. That's probably what you would say. And if I ask you, okay, how many people were fed, but I'm not going to ask you this, I'm just going to say, the next question is yours, is to say that there was probably 5,000 men and not even counting the women and children. But how many baskets full were left over? Can you remember? 12, yes. Can you remember that story? 12 baskets full were left over. And I can still remember one of the first times I was at school when I read this text and I thought, oh, this story is wrong. Or at least I remembered the story wrong because I have different facts in my mind. And in fact, you would be forgiven if you started reading the Matthew according to the Gospel according to Matthew. If you read it and you came to chapter 14, Matthew 14, and you read there were 5 loaves and 2 fishes. And then in just the next chapter, chapter 15, you read the story we've just read with 7 loaves and a few fishes. And you may think, well, some scribe got it wrong here. They fell asleep and then they copied it wrong and they just duplicated it. The point is, this is actually a different story. It's a different story. This was the second time that Jesus took the little people had and he used it to feed a multitude of other needy people. Now, this may seem trivial to you. It's like, okay, yeah, that's interesting. Thank you, Jaco. That's a nice Bible lesson. But it may seem trivial. But I think it's extremely significant. And it's the final important lesson that I want to draw from this miracle. It's the 12th lesson that I want to draw. You see, one of the things I've learned from my 2 girls, Heidi and Sean, is that one occurrence of any event may seem like a coincidence. But the moment it's repeated, it is seen as a pattern. For instance, let's say I go to the movies with them, and I buy some popcorn. That would be like, wow, thank you, Papa, that's great. And so we have some popcorn, that's great. However, if we go to another movie at another time and I buy popcorn again, I have no chance of ever getting away without buying popcorn after that. Okay? Then it is like, when we go to the movies, we always get popcorn. Because in their minds, to them, twice equals always. Okay, twice equals always. And I dare say that it's the same with this miracle. Jesus is not always going to enhance your dinner, but he will always provide what you need. He will always provide what you need. In fact, I believe that he did the same type of miracle a second time. First of all, because it was needed. But second, because he wants us to learn to trust him. He wants us to learn to trust him. It was like, I can do this a second time if I want to. So what's stopping me from doing it a third or a fourth or a fifth time if I wanted to? Nothing is impossible for me. In fact, if you wonder whether what I've just said is true or not, just listen to what we read in just the next chapter. So the chapter 14, we read of the first multiplication of the loaves. Then in chapter 15, we read it again. And then in chapter 16, we read this. They were in a boat going to the other side. This is just a bit of background. They were in a boat going to the other side of the lake. And Jesus made a comment about bread and yeast. And the disciples didn't quite grasp what Jesus was saying. And so they started chatting amongst themselves. And they thought that Jesus was upset with them for not bringing bread along. And Jesus overheard their conversation, and you almost get the idea he was a little exasperated with them. And then he said this in Matthew 16. You of little faith. He didn't, maybe he sighed, I don't know, that was just for dramatic effect. Okay, so, you of little faith. Do you still not understand? Don't you remember the 5 loaves for the 5,000 and how many baskets full you gathered? Or the 7 loaves for the 4,000 and how many baskets full you gathered? So friends, maybe you are daunted by the year ahead. Maybe it feels to you as though you do not know how you're going to get through the next week, let alone the next month. You don't even want to think about all the months ahead of you and the whole of 2023. But maybe, friends, just maybe, you are here this morning to hear Jesus say to you, as he did to his disciples on that boat, do you still not understand? Don't you remember? Don't you remember that time when you thought you didn't have a job, when you didn't know how your bank account was empty and you didn't know how you were going to survive, and I provided for you? Don't you remember that time when it looked as though that relationship you were in died and I resurrected it? Don't you remember that time when you had a terrible diagnosis, when the prognosis wasn't good at all, and I was the one who survived, who rescued you and saved you? Don't you remember that time when you were in an accident and I was the one who came through for you? Don't you remember How I gave you a spiritual family when you had no one left? Don't you remember how I've always been faithful in the past? Don't you remember? Because here's the thing, if you do remember, you will know that there is no reason for you to be fearful of the year ahead. I see your every need, and I have compassion on you. I know you are desperate, and I'm inviting you to come to me as you are. I can see you're hungry, and I can see you're in need. And I want to give you what you need, because I will never send you away hungry, because I love you too much. When you come to me, you will be satisfied, and you will find rest for your soul. And therefore, friends, as you go into this new year, with all its uncertainties, remember who God is. That He is the faithful, almighty, ever-present creator of heaven and earth. And He is the miracle worker. So trust Him, even and especially if you need a miracle in 2023. Oh, let's pray. Dear Lord, thank you so much for a new year, Lord. Thank you that you are already in this year. Thank you that you have this whole year in your hands, and you've got each one of us in your hands. Lord, I want to pray for everyone who's feeling overwhelmed and scared and desperate this morning. And I ask you in the name of Jesus to do the miracle they so desperately need. And come and do in our lives what only you can. We need you. We need you. And we give our lives and the whole of 2023 in your hands. Please lead us. In Jesus' name.